Welcome to another episode of the Aligned Life, the Goddess Life, where we dive into living life fully aligned, mind, body, and spirit, at peace and unbothered. In this episode, we actually had a little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning. So, Ashley and I just kind of jump in this latest episode of our trauma talk, where we are looking at blame at the sixth chakra, our third eye chakras. So, sit down, grab a cuppa, and join us for our conversation as we explore what that looks like in the self, spiritual practice, and opening ourselves up to healing. We are talking about blame in the sixth chakra in the third eye today and how that shows up for us, how that shows up and what's going on in the world right now, the way that we are perceiving other people, perceiving ourselves, and what we can kind of do to shift that focus and understand why we're doing that. And I'll let you start and kind of take us into where you see this, because you're the one that originally mapped this, for those who don't know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so um blame for one, right, is when we reject all responsibility and push it external to ourselves. And in doing so, it disempowers us and perpetuates this victimization cycle, right? Because if you don't have any control, any responsibility within a situation, that power is not yours. So you're giving it away to someone else, whoever you're pushing that blame onto, and saying, this is your fault. You did this, right? And taking all that responsibility and all that power of your own and pushing it onto them. And we do this often because it feels safer than admitting that we made a mistake, that we didn't know what we know now. And, we were wrong. That really scary word that nobody likes to admit. I used to go I used to go so far that I would say, "I'm never wrong. If I'm not right, I'm left." And that was my excuse. But man, do I hate being wrong. And being an intelligence analyst for the majority of my adult life, it was life or death if I was wrong. And you learn to be very, very, very picky with how you phrase things so that you're never wrong. You just had a little bit too much confidence in the direction that things were going. You always give yourself an escape door, right? Well, I didn't say that it was going to happen. I said it was likely going to happen. Likely,
Right.
you know?
You're always kind of like making sure that there's a little caveat there. There's
Absolutely.
that, and like, you're making sure that there's no way that anything else can come in, that there's no possible fashion that another person, God forbid, another person could know something that you do not know.
Absolutely. And, there's not anything wrong with being succinct and speaking very specifically in your communication, letting people know how much confidence you have in something. I mean, science is built on that, right? So is the world of statistics, which validates scientific studies. But when it becomes your default in order to avoid being wrong, it becomes a problem. And, that goes back into the why behind the choices that I'm always preaching about. So when we look at blame at the sixth chakra specifically, this is your intuition, this is your truth, right? And I feel like truth is a big one in this theme because with everything going on in the United States, it's easy to blame your truth and how you perceive that truth, right? On others. Well, they did that. They are doing this. They are going to do this, right? And when we're in that blame space, we're again giving that power to the other party. We're disempowering ourselves. We're not saying, okay, this is happening. This is fact. This is happening. I do not like the direction that this is going. It feels like it's violating my values. What can I tangibly control? What can I do in order to help shift the direction?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that oftentimes when we begin to look at, okay, well, they did this. And I'm speaking from, like, looking at our social happenings right now. So when I use the words "they," it's very much about putting that blame on, like, a group instead of maybe just another person. But it also happens, like, on a much smaller scale. I find myself being guilty of this when I have confrontations with people who are in my direct circle, and sometimes I'm like, "Well, but if they hadn't have done this, then I would not have reacted this way." And that is such a common thing, I think, for us as people, that statement right there. "Well, if you hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have done that." But you are the one who is responsible for the way that you react to things. To give an example, I actually had a situation with a friend of mine the other day. And in case she's listening, don't worry, we're good. And she woke up on the wrong side of the bed and was just like, she was in a mood. It was absolutely awful. And I made a mention to her. I said, why are you so angry at the things that I'm saying? Just curious to know, had I done something wrong? Is there something we needed to talk about? Is there a way that we can make this open up? And her response was essentially, well, I'm not bad, but if you want me to get mad, I can. And I found myself after that devolving into this blame cycle, and all of these other things about her and this situation and the way that she responded to me. And I took a step back and I was like, "You know what? This isn't what I need to be doing right now. I don't need to be throwing all of this negative energy, all of this idea that, well, she did this, she could have done this. And I just need to respond from my elevated self, from my idea of that intuitive opening, and go ahead and squash this now." And the way I responded to her was, "I'm really sorry that you feel this way. I don't feel like we have had an interaction that really warranted this. So I'm going to take a moment and we can come back to this later." And instead of throwing so much at each other, we were able to come back later and be like, "Okay, she was having a bad morning. I was having like a very forward motion kind of a day. And those two energies just weren't jiving at that time. And really we needed to come together and see how maybe I could have assisted her or come to a more plateaued ground instead of getting into this emotionally charged atmosphere."
Absolutely. So I love that you told that story because it kind of gives me this beautiful segue because we were briefly talking about this before we started. But if you're familiar with David Hawkins' work, he has the levels of consciousness, right? And when you look at the map of the levels of consciousness, um, blame falls into the level of guilt, and the God view of this level of consciousness is vindictive, right? And when we're looking at blame,
Yes.
blame is very, very vindictive. And you look at life as things are evil, and it leads to destruction, right? And when I was going through my books, because I have a couple of different ones on his work, and if you have not read David Hawkins, I highly recommend it. But so in his introduction to this level of consciousness, he says guilt so commonly used in the form of blame by our society to manipulate and punish manifests itself in a variety of expressions, such as remorse, self recrimination, masochism, and the whole gamut of symptoms of victimhood. And again, that blame perpetuates that disempowerment and victimhood. Often, this is shown up in this preoccupation with sin, an unforgiving emotional attitude that is often exploited by religions. Now, I'm not saying that, if you're religious and you believe in sin, that's bad, right? That's blame. But what this does is it perpetuates this cycle of playing tag with responsibility. And when no one wants to take responsibility, nothing can change. And it's up to us to really look at what our roles are in each situation and lay claim to our choices, our behaviors, our words, our roles in those situations, and be willing to sit at the table and have those discussions. First, taking responsibility and then seeking that understanding.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm reminded of those conversations that we have with people, and they typically happen, this is also part of our development as humans. Um it makes me think so much of that concept of the theory of mind, which I brought up to you before we started this episode today, because that's been what I've been going over in my class this week.
Mhm.
And this idea that we are capable of perceiving another person's experience through uh this cognitive problem solving that we're given, and this progresses as we age, like as teenagers. And what you were just saying, all of that reminds me of all of those arguments that I had as my very confident, self-driven teenage self that replied to everyone with the word, but this, when they came to me with an argument or a need or an emotional output. And it was very much like, okay, so how are you blaming everybody but yourself? A lot of us going through those stages heard that from our parents, heard that from leaders and teachers and other educators who, would constantly tell us that we had to blame everything on anybody but ourselves. And I don't think that many of us understood what that meant until we were older. And it is that idea of, okay, our response to everything is, but this. And it's not directing it to anywhere near us. It's directing it to the situation, to other people. It is directing it to outside sources, sometimes even like those big ethereal sources. I'm reminded of a lot of Abrahamic religions and the ideas of, well, this happens because of God, or this happens because of the devil. This happens because of this, when really all of that anger, all of that hatred, all of that negative, consequential driven decision making is coming from inside of you and yourself.
Absolutely. So when I was looking at the dualities of guilt and hate that belong to this level of consciousness, right? The attraction side is making judgments and punishing self or others, whereas the aversion side is surrendering to God, forgiveness of self or others. Um, so you're really attracting that level of consciousness through making those judgments, through pushing your preferences onto other people.
And that, I think, is also a big part of those ideas of blame. Things should be like this.
Mhm. But again,
Why aren't things like this?
it ties right back into these are your preferences. This is your beliefs. This is your truth. And other people don't have the same experiences, don't have the same beliefs. They don't have to. They have different lived experiences that they've learned the world works in different ways. Um, and so your experience is not the experience of the billions of people that have walked this planet. And it is
Yes.
unrealistic to expect that to be the case.
Oh, absolutely. We see that in the spiritual communities when we talk about people of color and other communities, indigenous communities, and there's a polarization on both sides of this that both fit into this. There's a balance that is needed there. And but a large part of it is this artificial understanding from the self that is very dismissive of the experience of those other communities and cultures. And we see it politically also in the ideas of diversity and minority acceptance. It's this inability to understand that the other person's experience may not be the same as yours. And that goes both ways. I was talking with somebody, I think it was actually last night. It may have been the night before. And we were talking about how all of these people's experiences are very valid. We can't tell a person who's missing out on work that they're not missing out on work. Well, at the same time, we can't tell a person who is being objectified and victimized by a culturally driven system that is made to do that, that that's not happening to them. We're not able to make those deciding factors and decisions for other people. And being able to take ourselves out of that, to step into our intuition, into that third eye, to have that objective observer view and understanding, we can understand that our truths are just as valid as another person's truth who may be totally different from ours.
Absolutely. Now, I will caveat and say, if you are of that objectified party, right? It is a very dangerous game to put all of that responsibility onto that system. Again, because then you are taking all of your power away and putting that blame onto them. Now, I'm not saying it's your fault. Those are not the same thing, right? What I am saying though is you can look at your power, your locus of control, and find ways to shift and push that system to being more equitable for all people involved, right? Because the people that are creating the system do not have your experience, so therefore they do not realize oftentimes what they are doing, or in some cases they do, right? But regardless, being able to assume personal responsibility for how you participate or do not participate in those systems allows you to start making choices to shift the path versus just staying in this space of, well, it's just not, the world is not made for me, it's just not fair, and just surrendering to that statement as if you have no ability to impact change.
Correct. Correct. We all have this power that we're able to harness and grasp, and with this clarity take advantage of. I cannot stress to you how bonkers this is, that this is our topic, that this is the alignment for this week, because what I had to do for my class, just to like lay it all out on the table here, we evaluated the houseless community, their lack of healthcare resources, and how that results in increased poverty, how that results in increased drug use, how that results in increased malnourishment. And our objective was to take all of these ideas and come up with a plan to bridge the gap between those who can access healthcare resources, and create a plan that could actually help those who are houseless, who are going through those things, and bringing them over to our side, to this our side's the very wrong phrase for this conversation, I'm realizing.
Mhm.
But bringing them the capability that we have, all of the resources that we have, and allowing them access to that, showing where we can make a difference, where we can make a change, because we have this other understanding where there's a lack of need and we're able to help that instead of feel that victimization in ourselves while also blaming that side for a continuing problem, which is something we see on a huge spectrum as a social class in the United States.
Absolutely. And it's funny because when I pulled all of this energy, it was what, January 6th ish.
Oh my yes, it was like
It was like
right at the
week 2
beginning of
into January. So in case you were wondering, y'all, last week's theme, we kind of skipped a few because uh chaos, right? But last week was chaos
life,
at the
man.
root chakra, okay? Last week was chaos at the root chakra. The week prior, the first week of February, well, first full week of February, I should clarify, the 6th through the 12th, I think it was, that was loss at the fifth chakra, like feeling like you've lost your voice. And when did all those executive orders roll out? Right then.
I cannot
Uh,
stress that alignment enough.
week 5 of January. Week 5. We are on January week 5. Okay, so that was the last week of January. It was anxiety at the seventh chakra. So anxiety around this, our power to choose, our choice, what we have power of to impact and what direction we want to go, right? That was anxiety. So everybody's like freaking out, like, where are we going with this? I
Oh
don't
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know where we're going. It's about to get crazy. And then we're just stunned into silence the following week. And it leads us to
Well, and
this
I think
space where it's almost like the stages of grief, right? Now we're getting into the blame. And next week's gonna feel like helplessness at the solar plexus if you fall into this blame trap.
oh yes. You know, it's so interesting because I've been, of course, I don't think there's anybody that's not having political conversations right now. And typically we're not very political, but I feel like this is an important thing, especially for where we're at in in what we're talking about and where we're going with this and how it's showing up in our lives. And one of the big conversations that I've been having with everyone is this the removal of the blindfold,
Mm-hmm.
and with that comes a lot of this blame and a lot of this guilt throwing or this I'm going to call it shame seeking, because it's not like we're ashamed of ourselves and the decisions that we made. It's throwing shame at other people, like you did this, you did this, that blame happening. And it's, but it's going a little bit further. There's so much there, and it's coming from a place of hurt, and it's coming from a place of feeling unheard. And that's not the hurt and feeling unheard is absolutely so valid. And we need to take a look at all of the people who are also having those blindfolds pulled from their faces and who are feeling that internal shame because maybe they were blind to things that were going to happen, or maybe they didn't have all of the information for whatever reason before they did something to mitigate a lot of the things that are happening right now. And when we explored it that way, I've been noticing so many people are using words like stupid or ignorant or again, that idea of blame throwing, this is your fault out there, and really ostracizing all of the other people when they're trying to come to this understanding of, oh shit, is not the answer. The answer is to be able to pull yourself back into that empowerment and do that communal empowerment that we talk about so often, because all of us are in the same boat, no matter what side of anything you're on right now.
Absolutely. So fun fact. I have the Wild Unknown tarot deck, right? Well,
I love this deck.
when I received this deck, it was torn up. It was definitely a terrible print. So I had attempted to use my cry cut and cut the borders, and that did not go well. So now I use this deck as my bookmarks. So I just grab a random card and I just toss it in my books as I'm reading.
Yes.
So I somehow ended up with the star card in this book, the transcending the levels of consciousness, right? And it's so aptly right in the guilt and vindictive hate section of levels of consciousness, which is where the blame is found, right? And I really, really love this statement, and it ties directly into what you were just saying, right? But I needed to give you that background to understand just how synchronous this was.
Yes. I love how that is also a theme in this is literally how synchronous all of this
Right?
is.
So the statement is on this page where the bookmark was conveniently placed. In the spiritual world, the basic dictum is, and I think I said that word right. Don't come for me if I didn't. Just correct me and tell me how to actually say it. There are no justified resentments. This statement is abhorred by the ego. Oh, yeah, it says, but what about so and so? And then it goes through its laundry list of litanies of horrors and violations of rights, injustices, presumptive arguments of ethics and morality. Every counselor, sponsor, or professional is familiar with such recitations. To recover, the question has one has to face is whether one wishes to cling to it and thereby get the juice or give it up. This is the point of decision without which healing cannot occur. So, this is the point where we have to actually release that hate and choose forgiveness instead.
Yes. Yes. I love that because absolutely, and I am guilty of this. I am guilty of falling into everything that is, well, you made this decision. Well, that's very anti me. That's very anti all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And as children, and somewhere it gets lost in translation, but as children, we're often taught to hear out the other side of things. We're taught this when we start learning about debate, when we start learning about different perspectives in literature. We are taught all of this of being able to understand what the other side of something looks like, to take in their situations, have this idea, and be able to share your personal experience with them and come to a set of conclusions. This idea of communal problem solving where we can come to terms and it be equals instead of throwing out all of these very attack-like statements. It's so interesting because as we go through high school and we get into our young adult years, we become very engrossed in determining our personal life path. And somehow that begins to translate into this is my life. And I know why that happens. It's because in our idea of this Western idea of culture, we are taught that the self, our individual life and our individual life path is the most important, and that our views are the most important. And that's absolutely not incorrect. And at the same time, it also closes us off so much from being able to have this idea of perception without illusion. We can't be present for others and for all of the communities when we're cutting off their voices, their experiences, to kind of echo what was said before. And we're also doing that when we're throwing this guilt at them, making them the guilty party and not trying to come together and finding a point of reason, finding this plateau where we can say, hey, you all, and again, I'm using the more political and social examples here because that's what's important and in our faces right now. And one of the big topics has been jobs. I am here to tell you that no one can find jobs. It doesn't matter what color you are, who you believe in, no one can find a job right now. And it does not matter what side you're on, period. Like, and the fact that so many people are having an issue coming to this plateau to understand that it's not their fault, it's not your fault, and it's also not the person's fault in the middle. There's a whole other congregation at work here that we need to take a look at. But it's taking away, it's becoming divisive. And when it becomes divisive, we're pulling the empowerment away from not only other people, but from ourselves. And we're giving all of that up. And it's so intense. I'm reminded of what you said before this, that idea of self assurance and being able to step into that. When we step into that, we can share those experiences with each other and we can come to this cultural understanding together instead of separate.
Absolutely. And my default, and it's taken a lot to get me here, but my default assumption about other people, and I will not lie to you and tell you that it always applies because I still find myself falling into traps of how could you? But my default judgment when dealing with most people is that we are always doing the best we can with the resources we have. So, my goal is always to understand that no matter how absurd your point of view may be, or where you stand on different policies and issues compared to me, my goal is always to understand what makes you think that. How did you get there? And when I take the time and people entertain my questions, right? Because that doesn't always happen. But when I take the time to, try to put myself into their position, well, what would make me think that? What would make me believe that? And start inquiring and seeking to understand how they came to that conclusion and understand why that is their current truth, right? It helps me bridge that gap so that I'm not bouncing between this judgment energy. And again, I fall into it too sometimes where I'm like, "Oh, there is no way that I could even begin to justify how you think that that is okay." But I also, at the same time, am able to recognize, that's a hard value for me. And without contrasting experiences, we will never learn the depths of ourselves. We need those contrasting experiences to push us beyond where we are. Otherwise, we get very stagnant and complacent and comfortable and we just don't grow. So, when we look at those contrasting viewpoints, we can really use that as an opportunity to figure out, what my needs are. What are my values? Why do I believe what I believe? Or even just realizing that, when you're met with the polar opposite of your own belief, all of a sudden it becomes awareness, right? There have been many a times where I've never consciously had a thought about X, Y, or Z, but I'm in conversation and I'm like, I'm just now realizing that this is the belief that I hold that is in complete opposition to yours. And
Oh, yeah.
without those types of experiences, we'll never know. So use it as an opportunity to not only understand others, but yourself, um, instead of going into judgment, instead of going into blame, right? Again, I'm going to throw that line right back at you. There is no justified resentments.
I love this. And I love that idea of how you approach things, because it's very conscious. And that's something that, as we go from our early adult development into the later adult stages, we realize is very necessary. Um, and we're taught this though, again within like our high school years. And there is, for some reason, this disconnect as we go into our early adult development. And when we begin to remember this and we begin to understand, lots of times it's also kind of fought with that idea of blame. I'm reminded of so a while ago, you shared this video with me, and I shit you not. I reference this video at least twice a week. And it was a video of a man he was actually talking about addiction recovery. And he was talking about the conscious effort that it takes to make the change in our mental cycles, to get past the difficulty of having to change and it becoming that static habit that we're just automatically doing.
Hmm.
And he was talking about how it's like a curve. You do absolutely have to think about the words that you say to a person. When I was talking to my friend the other day and we had such a huge blow up and a huge issue, I did think to myself, I had to stop myself, because unevolved Hallie from many, many years ago, would have just blown up. And when someone says something to me like, well, I can get mad if you want me to, my immediate response then would have been, well, let's get mad then, because I can match your energy. We can do that, which is a whole other principle. But it was that conscious effort in me to say, whoa, you haven't done this in a long time. You've taken yourself out of this. What should your reaction be as evolved Hallie? What would you do in this situation that would not instigate it into something further? How can you come to understand what this person is going through, and how can you relate to it? Very similarly with what you were saying. And how would you respond to that when you need to in that scenario? Which is why my response was, I don't think that this has been deserved or instigated in such a way. Maybe we need to take a second. Maybe you need to wake up a little bit more. Maybe you need to have an epiphany moment of what's going on with you before we can continue having conversation. And it's that same idea of evaluating our next steps, evaluating the other people that we need to take into account when we're seeing things from different perspectives, morally, ethically. And you will often find that they're not morally unaligned with you. They're not ethically unaligned with you. They simply have differing information that fuels that same idea of morality and ethics. And we can come together on that. We can become communal on that. I also like how this, is going back into that idea of like empowering when you're feeling disempowered. And that idea of, you said something so powerful before we started the episode. Guilt is the manipulation. Expand on that for me, please, because that, like, I wrote that down in big bold letters with stars next to it.
Oh, goodness gracious. Things just come out of my mouth. I don't have conscious thought of them. It just kind of flows out. And I surprise myself most of the time. Oh,
That's a powerful statement, because it
oh,
is. It's so the manipulation.
okay. Let me grab the book I was looking at whenever I said this because I need the spark. Give me a moment. Um, okay. So
You're
this is the
fine.
passage I was reading before I started speaking. Guilt so commonly used in society to manipulate and punish manifests itself in a variety of expression. Okay. So and I've read that before, right? So we were talking about how guilt. Oh, I think were we talking about how we really 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 hate being wrong?
Well, we were, and we were also talking about the idea that idea of like pushing the responsibility out onto others.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was how we hate being wrong and how it's very much, like, and all I can think about when I see this is like, and I keep going back to like this whole jobs thing, and I'm reminded of the South Park episode of when they're all going around going, "You took our germs." I don't know if you see that episode. It's hilarious. And at the same time, it exactly explains the idea of guilt as manipulation.
I'm about to ask my autopilot.
Ooh, I forget we can ask the AI to do things.
Right. Now, okay, before I lose my thread while I'm looking for this piece of insight you're referring to, I need some help understanding because I am stumped.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a very interesting thing to say. The phrase, well, I can get mad if you want me to. And like I'm trying to imagine any point where that has come out of my mouth and I'm coming up with nothing. And I don't understand what prompts someone to say that and what their underlying intentions are in saying that phrase.
So in this particular situation, it was not, it came from a place of like literal discombobulation. Like it didn't have a purpose or a rhyme or a reason. And even she at that point said that. She was like, I don't know why I said that. I don't know where it came from. It did, like she went back and looked at it and she was like, there's no connecting pieces here. I don't understand why I said that. And also at the same time, in my history, I have said this to people, and other people have said it to me in other situations. And it's typically because there's already a level of microaggression or true aggression at the person for having made poor decisions. And it comes from this idea of blame, where it's like, okay, well, I feel like you have created a problem between me and this person. I feel like you're annoying and you don't actually add anything to the conversation. I feel like you are a user and you just take money from people and you're just in these situations to get what you can get out of it. And that usually builds up to a point where the person is just they feel like they're like taking the brunt of everything. And then in an explosive reaction, the other person gets mad and they're like, well, why are you having such an adverse reaction to the things that I'm doing? The angry person is looking at the person who feels like they're the brunt of the situation, and you're like, why are you getting upset because of my actions? And they're like, well, I wasn't upset, but now I am, because I you have given me all this reason to be upset and I haven't been upset, and now I'm going to get upset. It's usually this very instigatory trigger into a larger problem. It's very low vibration, very devolved type of an energy, where we're in this primitive self and it's a very combative self. And no, it doesn't make sense. It really does not.
Okay, because like in my brain, I was like, maybe like you're you're frustrated, but you're patiently just kind of exploring it, trying to understand, and someone's like, "Why are you
Um,
upset?"
it could be
Um,
taken that way, but it's usually much more manipulative and coming from a much more toxic place.
okay. I would love our listeners to comment and share their experiences with that phrase, because that's just an interesting um way to communicate, and I want to understand it. Okay, so
Yes,
I
I would
found it.
also love
I
this.
found it. So I was right. We were talking about that quote in transcending the levels of consciousness. So the point that you heard was guilt is commonly used in society as a means of manipulation and punishment. And so that was that point where you were like, guilt is a manipulation tactic. And so what was happening within that space was trying to form words and concisely package this. So essentially, we make other people feel guilty by putting blame onto them in a way to manipulate, so that we are able to dodge that responsibility, right? And avoid being wrong, while also trying to externalize the emotions that we feel around things and justify and rationalize our beliefs when we feel like there is a potential that they could have been harmful.
Oh, I like that. That's an interesting way to look at that. I think that that gives depth to the idea of guilt. Uh, Guilt is often so much that internalized idea of guilt. And I think that this puts a new perspective on it to show people that flip side of that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, typically you would associate blame with like blame and guilt together through like that self blame, feeling guilt. But it's an internal external experience depending on how you process and your comfort level with taking responsibility in uncomfortable situations. But when you're able to take that responsibility of, hey, I made a mistake, I didn't consider these things, and you start to really like own those pieces and those roles and responsibilities, it allows you to move into that learning space where you can start to apply what you've gained from that contrasting experience and start to shift and adjust your own choices and your own behaviors to integrate that.
I'm as you talk about this, and I'm also like kind of halfway playing around with our AI here to see like what else it can give me on this too. But it's so much as you talk about this, all I can think about is gaslighting.
Yeah, but I
Like,
mean, gaslighting typically is more intentional, right? But even
yes.
still, oh man, there's this book called I Think Therefore I'm Wrong. And he uses the gaslighting um examples, and like he walks you through these experiences. Sorry, my pest control guy is a little bit early, so I was messaging him and opened the garage from my phone. And I can't talk and type at the same time.
Oh no, you are so fine. We're coming up on our
Um,
hour. So if we want to wrap this up so you can deal with your pest control guy, we absolutely can.
Okay. Well, I want to find the gaslighting thing real quick. So that I can grab it because I really love this book. So it's actually full title, full disclosure is I Think Therefore I'm Wrong, A Guide to Bias, Political Correctness, Fake News, and something else. And the Future of Mankind, right? the full
Yeah.
title of the book. But I really, really love how
Not
he
me
goes
writing this
over.
down.
Yeah, it's a great book because it really walks you through all of these biases and defense mechanisms and what they look like. And I love how he captures that. So let me grab it real quick, and that way I can walk you through the example that he gave. Language, words, and the deep dive. I think it was this one. Oh, I have this highlighted because I just switched over to it. Words are the message, but it is the emotion that energizes them. And I really loved that quote right there because it's true. Like words can be words, but it's the emotion that is conveyed and how we take it. And if you're just texting, it's really, really, really hard to convey that emotion and perceive it correctly too. Okay, so denial. That's why I wasn't finding gaslighting. So the example that he uses, these are the defense mechanisms that are considered psychotic, which is different types of denial from disbelief, abdication of responsibility to physical conversion of symptoms, where the unconscious conflicts manifest as physical problems. So in denial, it was the wife saying, "You were really mean to me in the store." And the husband responds, "You're kidding me, right? I didn't do anything." And then you have projection within that, where the wife says, "You were really mean to me in the store." And the husband says, "No, it was you who were mean to me. You embarrassed me in the store by asking me that." Right. And then you have fantasy aspects of gaslighting, where the wife says, "You were really mean to me in the store." And the husband says, "No way. I was just defending myself. I thought you were going to throw that thing at me." You also have physical conversion, where it goes from "you were really mean to me in the store" to the husband saying, "I have such a headache. I think it's a migraine." And all of a sudden it's redirecting the conversation.
Right. Right.
And again, I really, really love this book because there's so many different defense mechanisms that are outlined, and they give you these tangible examples. And you'd be like, "Oh my goodness, I know that one. I get it all the time from so and so."
I I love this. I am going to grab a link to this book and put
Mhm.
it into uh the show notes
Okay.
also.
Well, I want to also caveat off of that and say, I think it's really, really powerful to take this idea of blame and manipulation and guilt tripping and all of those things and gaslighting, right? And I think it's really, really powerful to see it as a defense mechanism, right? Because a person feels attacked and they are in turn trying to defend themselves because they had this idea of being wrong and this
Yeah.
fear of being wrong, or this fear of, not enoughness, or whatever it is. Whatever is going on, there's a wound under there that's leading them to need to defend themselves. And this is how they've learned to cope. So, again, coming from that space of we are always doing the best we can with resources that we have, some people have never been taught how to appropriately navigate these difficult situations or feel like it's okay to learn from your mistakes. So they have picked up these defense mechanisms from the roles and the experiences that they've had in their life. And everybody's roles and role models are different as we're coming up. So it's important to really see it as that defense mechanism so that you can name it. You're defending yourself. You feel attacked. Let me step back a moment, check my emotions, and explore what's really going on here so that I can understand why you feel the need to defend yourself. And I can
Yes.
then, in turn, have that conversation. But I tell my clients all the time when it comes to communication, if you put someone on the defense, they hear nothing. They are so focused on defending their boundaries, defending their perimeter, right? And counterattacking, that they will not hear anything you have to say. And it's important to recognize that in how we approach difficult conversations too, because when we frame it as a very aggressive, not assertive, aggressive way, or a blame directed way. You did this. It immediately puts people into defensive mode and you cannot have a conversation. So trying different things, because each person responds differently, especially for your innermost circles, and learning how to approach those problems in a way that does not trigger those defenses can be really, really, really beneficial.
Absolutely. I think that that is part of what we often forget. And as you were talking about the fear of being wrong, I also, and not to start another thing, because we're not going to start another thing, because you have a guy that you have to deal with. um, but I'm reminded so much of like the fear of rejection, because a lot of people attribute that simply to being rejected by maybe situations of just acceptance. But the fear of rejection is very much also having your ideas, having your experiences, having all of this, your life validity being rejected also. And that is sometimes a deeper wound that a lot of people don't realize that they have. And it usually comes from a lot of deep-seated stuff. And it is a lack of not understanding, not knowing, and it is tapping into your defense mechanisms, because when somebody questions all of those things, all of your experiences, and this ties into the legitimacy of where this blame and this guilt is coming from. It often puts us in those situations where we need to, or at least feel like we need to, activate our defenses, put up our walls, and sometimes even like we're fighting to survive, we're fighting for our rights to be valid. And that's something we're seeing a lot of, that is going just right down this whole same pathway. Um, and it's so much, and all of that can be worked with within that third eye, and removing illusion, becoming that observer, and taking in the full picture instead of limiting your scope of understanding. um it's so
I
much.
I love that you tied in the fear of rejection. That's the one I was initially looking for when I said fear of being wrong. I'm glad you gave that to me, because it's absolutely like it is this belongingness wound, right? Which leads to that judgment, which leads to the projections, which leads to the defense mechanisms. It is this need to belong and be accepted, that drives all of this energy that we've talked about today. And by just being accepting and open and being like, yeah, our views are different, but that doesn't mean you don't belong, is a really powerful space to hold. And
Yeah.
allowing that person, we are not supposed to be two circles transposed onto each other. Life is like a Venn diagram, okay? Everybody has intersecting points to one degree or another. Some people, the circles will almost completely overlap, and others, they will barely just touch. And there's only a sliver of sameness, right? But the world is not designed for everyone to have the exact same experiences, because where do we grow? Where do we learn from that? So in allowing ourselves to overlap to varying degrees with different people, and just finding that common ground and allowing them to belong in that space because of that overlap, allows us to really begin to explore those different points of view, those different experiences, and understand, what makes them think that way, what makes them believe such things. Where did that come from? How did we get here? And that can open us up to different experiences, different perspectives. We can solve problems in new and different ways, where everyone, it's not a compromise where one person's losing and the other person's winning, or both people are losing. It's not a compromise, but instead it's a collaboration.
Yes. I love that, a collaboration. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And before we fully end this episode, because you need to go and deal with your pest control guy, I want to remind everyone that you're valid, Your experience is valid. You are worthy of love and acceptance. Your story is worthy of being heard and understood. And you're worthy of finding community and not having to always feel like you need to blame, and you're able to step into your own empowerment. Um,
I just
is
want to
there
throw
anything
in,
else you want to talk about today?
I just wanted to add into your statements and affirmations. Welcome, friend. You
Yeah.
belong here.
Absolutely. Everyone is welcome here. You know, the aligned life is just that we're aligned and we all align together, you know, whether you can see it plainly or whether it takes a minute of us having a conversation with you. We're all aligned here. We're all in this. We are all on a giant rock hurtling through space at so many miles an hour,
And y'all, please feel
sharing
free to
that experience.
disagree or throw in contradictory like viewpoints to what we've shared, because again, those contrasting experiences help expand and grow. It's like plants being hardied through the winter so that they can survive new and different conditions, right? We need those
Yep.
experiences to explore things from different perspectives. So share it all, whether you agree or disagree, that's okay. There is no right or wrong here. It just simply is.
I love that. Yes, that is absolutely something that we should everyone, not just you all, but also myself, need to take to heart in absolutely everything. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And it was nice to get back to this. And thank you to all of our listeners for sitting down with us as well. Please leave us your questions, comments, and concerns on any of the comments on any platforms. Feel free to shoot me an email at goddesslifecounseling@gmail.com with any ideas, also questions, comments, and concerns as well. And we will see you next time, friends.
And we're going to be talking about, I'm flicking pages, helplessness.
Oh, I like that one. I'm excited about that one.
Yes.
That's a
So
big one.
until next week.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed your cuppa and sitting at our table while we discussed blame, guilt, and this fear of rejection as we show up authentically, socially, individually, and spiritually. I hope that you gained some insight and some healing from this episode. And I also hope that you'll join us at our table again this upcoming week as we dive into helplessness at the solar plexus chakra. In this, we will see how this shows up for your individual life, your spiritual life, and how we can heal through it. And until then, don't forget to live life fully aligned, mind, body, and spirit. If you wish to connect with us in regards to any of our workshops, our community spaces, or get some information in regards to the resources and tools that we have learned to use on our individual paths, don't forget to like and subscribe us at youtube.com/, at the Goddess Life Healing. You'll be able to find our episodes live every week on our YouTube, and they'll go up on our Spotify the Monday afterwards. You can also subscribe to our emailing list. You can do that by sending an email to goddesslifecounseling@gmail.com or signing up at the goddesslifehealing.square.site. There, you'll also find information in regards to free workshops. You will also have access to our bi weekly Sacred Shadow Circle support groups. These support groups take place through Eventbrite and Zoom, and that information is listed in all of the places that I just mentioned. So take a look, join us at more tables, and we hope to see you soon.